What happens when a seemingly routine morning commute turns into a public display of blatant racism, captured on a bystander's phone and shared with the world? The biting November wind whipped Aisha's hair across her face as she hurried through the bustling Grand Central Terminal. Her tailored pantsuit, a sharp navy blue that complemented her complexion, did little to ward off the chill. She clutched her briefcase and a small, worn leather suitcase, the familiar weight comforting in the chaotic symphony of the station. Aisha, a successful marketing executive with a reputation for precision and efficiency, rarely allowed herself to be flustered, but even her practiced composure felt slightly frayed by the sheer volume of people surging around her. This was her daily ritual, a carefully choreographed dance through the morning rush hour. She knew the exact route to her platform, the optimal time to purchase her coffee, even the best spot to stand to avoid the worst of the crowds. Today, however, the familiar comfort was absent. An undercurrent of anxiety, a subtle tightening in her chest, hinted at something amiss. She couldn't quite place it, but the usual calm efficiency felt overshadowed by a vague unease. Reaching her platform, Aisha joined the orderly queue waiting to board the 7:45 express to Westchester. The air crackled with the low hum of anticipation and the murmur of conversations. She glanced at her watch. 7:42. Plenty of time. She took a deep breath, trying to shake off the lingering unease. This was just another Monday morning. As she approached the conductor, a tall, imposing man with a severe expression and a neatly trimmed mustache, Aisha presented her monthly train pass. It was a familiar routine, a simple exchange that usually took mere seconds. Today, however, the conductor, Mr. Henderson, didn't immediately accept the pass. He scrutinized it with an intensity that felt disproportionate to the situation, his gaze lingering on her face, then back to the pass, a slow, deliberate movement that sent a shiver down her spine. Aisha held her breath, her heart quickening its pace. She had used this pass countless times without incident. It was valid, updated, and clearly displayed her photograph. There was no reason for this delay, this unnecessary scrutiny. The subtle shift in his demeanor, the way his eyes seemed to appraise her, not just her pass, felt distinctly uncomfortable. It was the kind of feeling she'd learned to recognize over the years, a feeling that spoke volumes about unconscious bias and the subtle ways racism could manifest itself. "Excuse me," Aisha said, her voice calm despite the rising unease. "Is there a problem?" Mr. Henderson's response was abrupt, his tone sharp and dismissive. "This pass? I'm not sure it's valid. It looks tampered with." He held the pass up, examining it closely, his words dripping with suspicion. Aisha felt a surge of anger, but she fought to keep her voice even. "It's perfectly valid. I've used this pass every day for the past 3 months without issue." She pointed to her photograph on the pass, the clear, official stamp of the transit authority. "My picture is right there. The expiration date is clearly visible." He didn't meet her gaze. Instead, he continued to scrutinize the pass, his movements slow and deliberate, as if he were deliberately prolonging the encounter. The line behind Aisha began to shift impatiently, the murmurs of discontent growing louder. She could feel the weight of their eyes on her, a mixture of curiosity and awkward avoidance. No one offered to intervene, no one spoke up in her defense. The silence, punctuated only by Mr. Henderson's pointed silence, felt heavy and suffocating. The unease she'd felt earlier intensified, transforming into a cold knot of dread in her stomach. This wasn't just a simple oversight. This was deliberate. This was something else entirely. The way he was looking at her, the way he was speaking to her, it was a familiar pattern, a chilling echo of countless other encounters she'd had in her life, subtle acts of racism disguised as legitimate concerns. The suspicion in his eyes wasn't about the validity of her pass. It was about her race, about her presence. The knot of dread tightened. This was more than just an inconvenience. This was a deliberate attempt to humiliate her, to assert his power, to remind her of her place. The casual cruelty of it was breathtaking in its audacity. And in that moment, Aisha knew this was going to be far more than a simple delay in her commute. Mr. Henderson finally lowered the pass, his gaze still lingering on Aisha's face. His expression was a mask of thinly veiled hostility, a mixture of contempt and something else, something darker, that sent a chill down her spine. He cleared his throat, the sound amplified by the sudden silence of the growing queue. "I'm afraid this pass is invalid," he announced, his voice loud enough for everyone within earshot to hear. "It's been tampered with. You're trying to sneak onto the train without paying." Aisha's blood ran cold. The casual cruelty of his accusation, the blatant disregard for the truth, was shocking. She opened her mouth to protest, to reiterate the validity of her pass, but the words caught in her throat. The audacity of his lie, the sheer brazenness of his accusation, left her momentarily speechless. The passengers behind her shifted uneasily, their silence a testament to the uncomfortable tension that had settled over the platform. Some averted their gazes, others stared with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. The atmosphere had shifted, the casual hum of the morning commute replaced by a heavy, suffocating silence. Aisha felt the weight of their eyes, the silent judgment, the unspoken questions. It was a familiar feeling, the suffocating pressure of being the only black woman in a sea of white faces, the unspoken assumptions and prejudices that hung heavy in the air. "That's not true," Aisha finally managed, her voice trembling slightly despite her best efforts to maintain her composure. "My pass is valid. You can check the system. I've used it every day this month." Mr. Henderson scoffed, his eyes narrowing. "Oh, I'm sure you have. And I'm sure you have a perfectly plausible explanation for why your pass looks like it's been altered." He gestured dismissively towards the pass, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "But I'm afraid I can't let you on the train." His voice rose in volume, attracting the attention of more passengers. The murmurs of discontent grew louder, a rising tide of whispers and hushed conversations. Aisha felt a surge of anger, a burning resentment that threatened to overwhelm her. She wanted to scream, to lash out, to demand justice, but she knew that wouldn't help. It would only escalate the situation, confirming the prejudices he seemed so eager to reinforce. He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, yet loud enough for those nearby to hear. "You know, I've seen your type before. Always trying to get something for nothing. Always trying to take advantage of the system." His words were laced with venom, a subtle yet unmistakable hint of racial bias. Aisha's breath hitched in her throat. The casual racism, the thinly veiled bigotry, was breathtaking in its audacity. It wasn't a mistake. It was a deliberate act of aggression, a calculated attempt to humiliate and demean her. She felt a wave of nausea wash over her, the familiar sting of injustice burning in her chest. He continued, his voice rising again, his words laced with increasing hostility. "I'm not going to let you board this train. You're going to have to find another way to get to work. Maybe next time you'll think twice before trying to cheat the system." He gestured dismissively towards the exit, his eyes cold and unforgiving. The passengers around them were now openly staring, a mixture of discomfort and morbid fascination etched on their faces. Aisha felt a wave of isolation wash over her, the weight of their silent judgment pressing down on her like a physical force. She was alone, facing this man's blatant racism, his unfounded accusations, and the unspoken complicity of the onlookers. The anger simmered beneath her surface, a dangerous heat threatening to boil over. But she held it in check, knowing that any outburst would only play into his hands. This was a battle she couldn't afford to lose. "Not here. Not now." Mr. Henderson's voice, already loud, escalated further, morphing into a torrent of insults and accusations. He leaned closer, his face contorted in a sneer, his eyes burning with a hateful intensity that left Aisha breathless. The casual cruelty of his words, the blatant disregard for her dignity, was shocking in its audacity. He wasn't just refusing her passage. He was deliberately humiliating her, making a public spectacle of his prejudice. "You think you're too good for a simple ticket, huh?" He spat, his voice dripping with contempt. "Too good to follow the rules. Well, let me tell you something, lady. The rules apply to everyone, especially to your kind." The word kind, hung in the air, heavy with implication, a thinly veiled racial slur that left Aisha reeling. The casual racism, the blatant bigotry, was so brazen, so unapologetic, that it left her momentarily speechless. The passengers around them shifted uneasily, their silence a testament to the uncomfortable tension that had settled over the platform. Some averted their gazes, their discomfort palpable. Others stared with a mixture of shock and morbid fascination. No one intervened. No one spoke up in her defense. Aisha felt a wave of nausea wash over her, the familiar sting of injustice burning in her chest. This wasn't just a dispute over a train ticket. This was a deliberate act of aggression, a calculated attempt to humiliate and demean her in front of a crowd of witnesses. The anger simmered beneath her surface, a dangerous heat threatening to boil over, but she held it in check, knowing that any outburst would only play into his hands. He continued his tirade, his words becoming increasingly aggressive and discriminatory. He used racial slurs, thinly veiled under the guise of justification, belittling her profession, her appearance, and everything she stood for. Each word was a blow, a deliberate attempt to strip her of her dignity, to reduce her to nothing more than a target for his hate. "You think you're so smart, so sophisticated," he sneered, his voice laced with venom. "But you're just like the rest of them, trying to take advantage of the system. You think you can just waltz in here with your fancy clothes and your fancy pass and expect to get away with it? Think again." His words were a barrage of insults, a relentless assault on her character and her worth. He mocked her attire, her demeanor, her very presence. He spoke of her as if she were invisible, a nameless, faceless entity, a representative of an entire race rather than an individual human being. The casual cruelty of his words, the blatant disregard for her humanity, was breathtaking in its audacity. Aisha's hands clenched in a fist, her knuckles white. She wanted to scream, to lash out, to fight back, but she knew that wouldn't help. It would only play into his hands, confirming the prejudices he seemed so eager to reinforce. She had to remain calm, to maintain her composure, to show him that his words had no power over her. The passengers around them were now openly staring, their discomfort palpable. Aisha felt a wave of isolation wash over her, the weight of their silent judgment pressing down on her like a physical force. She was alone, facing this man's blatant racism, his unfounded accusations, and the unspoken complicity of the onlookers. The anger simmered beneath her surface, a dangerous heat threatening to boil over. But she held it in check, knowing that this was a battle she couldn't afford to lose. Not here, not now. She had to find a way to fight back, but not in the way he expected. She had to find a way to expose him, to show the world the true face of his prejudice. And she knew, with a chilling certainty, that her moment would come. Amidst the torrent of Mr. Henderson's hateful words, a subtle shift occurred in the periphery of Aisha's awareness. She noticed a young man, a college student judging by his backpack and slightly rumpled attire, standing a few feet away. He was subtly shifting his position, his movements almost imperceptible, yet somehow noticeable amidst the tense stillness of the crowd. He was holding a phone, his hand positioned as if he were taking a picture, but Aisha couldn't be sure. The angle was awkward, partially obscured by the bodies of other commuters. As Mr. Henderson continued his tirade, the young man's movements became more pronounced. He adjusted his grip on the phone, his thumb hovering over the screen. Aisha's heart pounded in her chest, a mixture of hope and trepidation. Was he recording? Was he documenting this blatant act of racism? The possibility filled her with a surge of unexpected relief. For the first time since the confrontation began, Aisha felt a flicker of hope. This wasn't just her against him. There was a witness. Someone was seeing what was happening. Someone was bearing witness to this injustice. The weight of her isolation, the oppressive silence of the onlookers, seemed to lessen slightly. The young man, David, as Aisha later learned his name, was acutely aware of the unfolding drama. He'd initially hesitated, unsure whether to intervene directly. He'd witnessed countless acts of microaggressions and casual racism throughout his life, often feeling paralyzed by inaction. But this was different. This was blatant, unapologetic bigotry, a public display of hatred that left him feeling both horrified and enraged. He pulled out his phone almost instinctively, his fingers moving with a practiced ease born from years of documenting his life through social media. He'd initially considered live streaming the encounter, but hesitated. Live streaming felt too intrusive, too public. It could potentially escalate the situation, putting Aisha in even greater danger. Instead, he opted to discreetly record the interaction, capturing the audio and video evidence of Mr. Henderson's hateful outburst. He held the phone low, his body partially obscured by the crowd, attempting to remain as inconspicuous as possible. He knew the risks. He knew that intervening could put him in danger, but the thought of doing nothing, of allowing this blatant injustice to go unchecked, was unbearable. He had to do something. He had to bear witness. He focused on capturing the audio, ensuring that Mr. Henderson's words were clearly audible. He zoomed in slightly, capturing the conductor's contorted face, the sneer on his lips, the hatred in his eyes. He tried to capture Aisha's expression as well, the quiet dignity in her face, the controlled anger simmering beneath her calm exterior. He knew this video could be powerful. It could be the evidence needed to hold Mr. Henderson accountable. As he recorded, David felt a surge of adrenaline. He was no hero, just a college student with a phone, but in this moment, he felt a sense of purpose, a sense of responsibility. He was documenting history, capturing a moment of injustice that could have far-reaching consequences. He was giving a voice to the voiceless, amplifying the cries of someone who had been silenced. And in that moment, he knew he had done the right thing. He had borne witness, and he would make sure the world saw what he had seen. He would make sure the world heard what he had heard. Despite the torrent of abuse, Aisha remained remarkably calm. Her outward composure was a carefully constructed shield, a defense mechanism honed over years of navigating a world that often treated her differently, a world where her race was often seen as a liability rather than an asset. Inside, however, a storm raged. The anger, the humiliation, the injustice of it all threatened to overwhelm her. But she held it in check, knowing that any outburst would only play into Mr. Henderson's hands. She refused to let him win. She refused to be reduced to a victim. She would not be silenced. "I am requesting to speak to your supervisor," Aisha said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "This is unacceptable. Your accusations are false and discriminatory." Her words were measured, each syllable carefully chosen, a testament to her years of experience in high-pressure situations. Mr. Henderson scoffed, his face contorted in a sneer. "A supervisor? For what? For refusing to let a fair dodger board the train? You're wasting my time, lady." He waved dismissively at the growing queue, his impatience palpable. "Move along. Find another way to get to work." Aisha refused to budge. She stood her ground, her gaze unwavering. "I will not move," she said, her voice firm. "I have a valid pass. I demand to speak to your supervisor. This is a blatant violation of my rights." She repeated her request, her voice calm yet resolute. She refused to be intimidated, refused to be silenced. She knew that her calm demeanor, her unwavering insistence on her rights, was a powerful weapon against his aggression. She was refusing to play by his rules, refusing to be drawn into his game of intimidation. Mr. Henderson's patience was wearing thin. His face flushed with anger, his voice rising in volume. He tried to intimidate her with his size, his authority, his position of power. He attempted to belittle her, to dismiss her concerns, to make her feel insignificant. But Aisha refused to be swayed. She stood firm, her resolve unshaken. She knew that the passengers around them were witnessing this exchange, that they were watching her stand up to his prejudice, her defiance a silent testament to her strength and resilience. She knew that her actions were sending a message, not just to him, but to everyone else present. She was showing them that racism would not be tolerated, that injustice would not go unchallenged. She continued to insist on her rights, repeating her request for a supervisor, her voice unwavering, her demeanor calm and collected. She refused to be intimidated, refused to be silenced. She was a force to be reckoned with, a woman who would not back down in the face of adversity. And in that moment, as she stood her ground, she knew that she was not alone. She had the support of the young man recording the encounter, the silent witness who was documenting her defiance, her courage, her unwavering commitment to justice. And that gave her strength. That gave her hope. Mr. Henderson's face was now a mask of furious frustration. Aisha's calm defiance, her unwavering insistence on her rights, was clearly getting under his skin. He had expected her to crumble under the weight of his insults, to back down in the face of his authority. But she hadn't. She had refused to play by his rules, and that enraged him. He threw his hands up in exasperation, his voice rising to a shout. "Fine," he bellowed, his words laced with contempt. "If you're so insistent on making a scene, then I'll give you what you want. I'll make sure you miss your train." He paused, his eyes narrowed, his gaze piercing. "But don't expect any apologies. You're wasting everyone's time." He turned his back on her, addressing the passengers behind her with a dismissive wave of his hand. "Next," he barked, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Let's get this line moving. We don't have all day to wait for this individual." He didn't bother to hide the disdain in his voice, the clear implication that Aisha was somehow less than, somehow unworthy of his time and attention. He then proceeded to mock her, his words dripping with sarcasm and thinly veiled racism. He suggested she take a taxi, a bus, or even walk, his tone dripping with condescending amusement. He painted a ludicrous picture of her struggling to navigate the city's public transportation system, her fancy clothes and briefcase somehow hindering her ability to cope with the challenges of a simple commute. "Maybe you should try walking," he sneered, his voice laced with mockery. "Am I to you good? Get some exercise. Get in touch with the common people." His words were a thinly veiled insult, a deliberate attempt to belittle her, to remind her of her supposed superiority, her detachment from the everyday struggles of ordinary people. He continued his verbal assault, ignoring her repeated requests for a supervisor. He dismissed her concerns, interrupting her attempts to explain, and making snide remarks about her intelligence, her competence, and her overall suitability for public transportation. His words were calculated, designed to humiliate and demean, to strip her of her dignity and reduce her to nothing more than a target for his hatred. The passengers behind Aisha shifted uncomfortably, their silence a testament to the awkward tension that had settled over the platform. Some averted their gazes, their discomfort palpable. Others stared with a mixture of shock and morbid fascination. No one intervened. No one spoke up in her defense. The weight of their silent complicity pressed down on Aisha, adding to the burden of injustice she was already enduring. Mr. Henderson's behavior was a masterclass in casual cruelty, a chilling demonstration of how easily prejudice could manifest itself in everyday interactions. He was not just denying her access to the train. He was deliberately humiliating her, making a public spectacle of his bigotry. And he did it with a chilling sense of impunity, as if he were completely unconcerned with the consequences of his actions. He was in control, and he knew it, or so he thought. He didn't know that his every word, every gesture, was being meticulously documented, captured for posterity by the young man with the phone, a silent witness to his cruelty. The tide was about to turn. Just as Mr. Henderson's tirade reached its peak, a second train employee arrived on the platform. Ms. Ramirez, a woman of middle age with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor, approached the scene with a quiet authority that cut through the tense atmosphere. She was a stark contrast to Mr. Henderson, her calm presence a soothing balm to the simmering anger that had filled the air. She observed the scene for a moment, taking in the tense expressions of the passengers, the angry flush on Mr. Henderson's face, and Aisha's resolute composure. She didn't interrupt, didn't immediately intervene. She simply observed, assessing the situation, gathering information before taking action. Mr. Henderson, caught mid-sentence, stopped abruptly, his face momentarily revealing a flicker of unease. He clearly hadn't anticipated a second witness, someone who could potentially challenge his authority and expose his behavior. The shift in his demeanor was subtle, yet palpable, a silent acknowledgement of the changing dynamics of the situation. Ms. Ramirez addressed Mr. Henderson with a calm, direct tone that left no room for misinterpretation. "Excuse me," she said, her voice clear and even. "I understand there's been a misunderstanding." She didn't accuse, didn't judge. She simply stated the obvious, creating a space for resolution. She then turned to Aisha, her expression softening. "Ma'am," she said, her voice gentle yet firm. "May I see your pass, please?" Aisha, relieved by the arrival of a second employee, handed over her pass without hesitation. Ms. Ramirez examined it carefully, her gaze focused, her expression serious. She didn't make any comments, didn't offer any reassurances. She simply examined the pass, her actions speaking volumes about her professionalism and her commitment to fairness. After a few moments, she looked up, her eyes meeting Aisha's. "Your pass is perfectly valid," she said, her voice clear and unwavering. "There's no reason why you shouldn't be allowed to board the train." The statement hung in the air, a stark contrast to Mr. Henderson's earlier accusations. The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken tension, a silent acknowledgement of the blatant injustice that had just been exposed. The passengers around them shifted uncomfortably, their faces a mixture of shock, embarrassment, and quiet relief. The atmosphere had shifted dramatically, the simmering anger replaced by a palpable sense of awkwardness. Ms. Ramirez turned to Mr. Henderson, her expression serious. "Mr. Henderson," she said, her voice firm, "I need to speak with you privately." Her tone was not accusatory, but it was undeniably authoritative. She didn't need to raise her voice. Her words carried the weight of her authority, her commitment to justice. Mr. Henderson's face paled. He knew he had been caught, his blatant prejudice exposed in front of witnesses. He opened his mouth to protest, to offer some kind of explanation, but Ms. Ramirez cut him off with a curt gesture. "Now," she said, her voice leaving no room for argument. The unspoken message was clear. His behavior would have consequences. Ms. Ramirez led Mr. Henderson away from the platform, leaving Aisha to board the train. The weight of the ordeal momentarily lifted. The young man with the phone, David, watched them go, a mixture of relief and satisfaction etched on his face. He had captured everything on video, the blatant racism, the unjust accusation, and the eventual vindication. He knew this video would be powerful, that it would expose the truth and hold Mr. Henderson accountable for his actions. He had borne witness, and he would make sure the world saw what he had seen. The walk to the private office was short, but it felt like an eternity for Mr. Henderson. The shame was palpable, a heavy weight pressing down on him as he followed Ms. Ramirez. He could feel the eyes of the passengers on his back, their silent judgment a constant reminder of his actions. The smug confidence he'd carried earlier had evaporated, replaced by a deep sense of unease and the chilling realization that his prejudice had been exposed. Ms. Ramirez didn't speak during the walk, her silence more damning than any words could have been. It was a silence that spoke volumes about the gravity of his actions, the seriousness of his transgression. It was a silence that allowed him to fully absorb the weight of his behavior, the impact of his words, the consequences of his prejudice. The office was small and sparsely furnished, a stark contrast to the bustling energy of the train platform. Ms. Ramirez closed the door behind them. The quiet click of final punctuation marked to the public humiliation he had just endured. She turned to face him, her expression serious, her eyes unwavering. "Mr. Henderson," she began, her voice calm but firm, "I have reviewed the security footage from the platform. I have also spoken with Ms. Johnson." She paused, allowing her words to sink in. "Your behavior was unacceptable. Your accusations were false, and your treatment of Ms. Johnson was discriminatory and unprofessional." Mr. Henderson mumbled a weak apology, his voice barely a whisper. He tried to justify his actions, to explain away his prejudice, but Ms. Ramirez cut him off. "There is no justification for your behavior," she said, her voice unwavering. "Your actions have brought discredit to this company, and they will not be tolerated." She outlined the consequences of his actions, the disciplinary measures that would be taken. He would be suspended, pending a full investigation. He would be required to attend diversity and sensitivity training. His future with the company was uncertain, hanging precariously in the balance. The reprimand was thorough, leaving no room for misinterpretation. Ms. Ramirez didn't mince words, didn't offer excuses. She laid out the facts, the consequences, and the expectations for his future conduct. She made it clear that his behavior would not be tolerated, that prejudice and discrimination had no place in the workplace. After the meeting, Mr. Henderson emerged from the office looking defeated, his shoulders slumped, his face pale. The smug confidence he displayed earlier was gone, replaced by a deep sense of shame and the chilling realization that his actions had consequences. He walked away, a shadow of his former self, his arrogance replaced by a profound sense of humility. Meanwhile, Aisha, having been cleared to board the train, felt a wave of relief wash over her. The ordeal had been exhausting, emotionally draining, and deeply unsettling. But she had stood her ground, had refused to be intimidated, had insisted on her rights. She had faced down prejudice and emerged victorious. As she boarded the train, she found a seat and took a deep breath, allowing herself a moment to process what had just happened. The young man who had been recording, David, sat down a few rows ahead. He gave her a small, almost imperceptible nod, a silent acknowledgement of their shared experience, a silent expression of solidarity. It was a small gesture, but it meant the world to Aisha. She was not alone. She had a witness, and justice, she knew, was on its way. Later that evening, after a long and emotionally draining day, David sat in his dorm room, reviewing the footage he'd captured on his phone. The video was raw, unedited, a stark and unflinching portrayal of the events that had unfolded on the train platform. He watched Mr. Henderson's face, the sneer, the contempt, the blatant racism etched into every line and gesture. He watched Aisha's quiet defiance, her unwavering resolve, her refusal to be intimidated. He felt a surge of anger, a burning resentment towards the injustice he had witnessed. He had to do something. He couldn't just let this go. He had to make sure that Mr. Henderson's actions were exposed, that he was held accountable for his behavior. He decided to upload the video to social media, accompanied by a short caption explaining what had happened. He chose a platform known for its rapid dissemination of news and its strong community of activists. He was aware of the risks. He knew that posting the video could expose him to criticism, to harassment, even to threats. But he knew he had to do it. He had to bear witness. He hit the post button, his heart pounding in his chest. He watched as the video began to spread, the number of views climbing exponentially. The comment section filled rapidly, a torrent of outrage and condemnation directed at Mr. Henderson's actions. People were shocked, disgusted, angered. They couldn't believe what they were seeing. The video quickly went viral, spreading like wildfire across social media platforms. News outlets picked up the story, amplifying its reach and ensuring that it reached a vast audience. The hashtag Justice for Aisha began trending, becoming a rallying cry for those who were outraged by Mr. Henderson's behavior. The comments section became a battleground, a clash of opinions and perspectives. Some people defended Mr. Henderson, claiming that Aisha had somehow provoked his reaction, that she had been disrespectful or uncooperative. Others condemned his actions unequivocally, calling for his dismissal and demanding an apology from the train company. The debate raged on, but the overwhelming sentiment was one of outrage and condemnation. People were shocked by the blatant racism displayed by Mr. Henderson, the casual cruelty of his words, the blatant disregard for Aisha's rights and dignity. They were also impressed by Aisha's calm demeanor, her unwavering resolve, her refusal to be intimidated. The video became a symbol of the fight against racism, a testament to the power of bystander intervention. It sparked conversations about systemic bias, unconscious prejudice, and the need for greater accountability in the workplace. It highlighted the importance of documenting injustice, of using technology to expose wrongdoing, and of speaking out against discrimination. David watched as the story unfolded, his initial anxiety replaced by a growing sense of satisfaction. He had done the right thing. He had borne witness. He had used his platform to amplify the voice of someone who had been silenced. And he knew that his actions would have consequences, that they would help to bring about change. He had helped to ignite a firestorm of outrage, and that firestorm, he knew, would not be easily extinguished. The viral video sparked a firestorm of public outrage, engulfing the train company in a maelstrom of negative press and public condemnation. The company's social media pages were inundated with angry comments, demanding accountability and an apology. News outlets across the country picked up the story, running headlines that highlighted the blatant racism displayed by Mr. Henderson and the company's apparent failure to address the issue. The public backlash was immediate and intense. Calls flooded into the company's customer service lines, expressing outrage and demanding action. Social media platforms were ablaze with discussions about the video, with many users expressing their shock and disgust at Mr. Henderson's behavior. The hashtag Justice for Aisha became a rallying cry for those who were demanding accountability and change. The company's reputation suffered a significant blow. Its stock price plummeted, investors expressing concerns about the potential damage to the company's brand image. Potential customers threatened to boycott the train service, expressing their anger and disappointment at the company's apparent indifference to racism. The intense public pressure forced the company to respond. Initially, its response was hesitant and defensive, attempting to downplay the incident and deflect blame. But as the public outcry grew louder, the company realized that it could no longer afford to ignore the situation. The damage to its reputation was too great, the potential financial consequences too severe. The company issued a public statement, expressing its regret over the incident and promising a full investigation. The statement was carefully worded, attempting to balance the need to address the public outcry with the desire to avoid admitting culpability. But the damage had already been done. The public was not satisfied with a simple statement of regret. They demanded concrete action, tangible evidence that the company was committed to addressing the issue of racism within its ranks. The intense public discussion sparked by the video extended far beyond the confines of the train company. It ignited a broader conversation about racism in the workplace, prompting discussions about unconscious bias, microaggressions, and the need for greater diversity and inclusion initiatives. Experts weighed in on the issue, offering insights into the systemic nature of racism and the challenges of creating truly equitable workplaces. The video became a symbol of the fight against racism, a stark reminder of the insidious ways in which prejudice can manifest itself in everyday life. It prompted discussions about the importance of bystander intervention, the need for greater accountability, and the crucial role of technology in exposing injustice. The public outcry was a powerful force, forcing the train company to confront its shortcomings and take concrete steps to address the issue of racism within its ranks. The consequences of inaction were too great to ignore. The public had spoken, and the company was forced to listen. Faced with mounting public pressure and the threat of further damage to its reputation, the train company was forced to take decisive action. The initial hesitant response, the attempt to downplay the incident and deflect blame, was quickly replaced by a more proactive and apologetic approach. The company realized that it could no longer afford to ignore the situation. The damage to its brand image was too significant, the potential financial consequences too severe. A formal apology was issued, a carefully worded statement acknowledging the seriousness of the incident and expressing remorse for the harm caused to Aisha and the public. The statement went beyond a simple expression of regret. It acknowledged the systemic nature of racism and the company's responsibility to address it. It was a significant departure from the initial defensive posture, a clear indication that the company was finally taking the situation seriously. The apology was accompanied by the announcement of Mr. Henderson's immediate dismissal. The company made it clear that his behavior was unacceptable, that prejudice and discrimination would not be tolerated within its ranks. The decision was a bold one, a clear signal that the company was committed to taking concrete steps to address the issue of racism. It was a move calculated to appease public anger and demonstrate a commitment to change. Beyond the dismissal, the company announced a comprehensive plan to address the issue of racism within its workforce. This included the mandatory implementation of diversity and sensitivity training for all employees, a program designed to raise awareness of unconscious bias, microaggressions, and the importance of creating a truly inclusive workplace. The training was to be extensive, covering a range of topics, including cultural awareness, implicit bias, and effective communication strategies. The company also pledged to review its hiring and promotion practices, ensuring that they were equitable and free from bias. They committed to increasing diversity within its workforce at all levels, from entry-level positions to senior management. They promised to create a more welcoming and inclusive environment for all employees, regardless of their race, ethnicity, or background. The announcements were met with a mixed reaction. Some praised the company for taking swift and decisive action, acknowledging the seriousness of the situation and demonstrating a commitment to change. Others remained skeptical, questioning whether the company's actions were genuine or merely a public relations exercise designed to mitigate reputational damage. The company's actions, however, were undeniable. The dismissal of Mr. Henderson, the public apology, and the commitment to diversity and sensitivity training were concrete steps towards addressing the issue of racism. They demonstrated a willingness to acknowledge its shortcomings and take responsibility for its failures. Whether these actions would be enough to fully repair the damage to its reputation remained to be seen. But the company had clearly signaled its intention to move forward, to learn from its mistakes, and to create a more just and equitable workplace for all. The road ahead was long, but the first steps had been taken. In the aftermath of the incident, Aisha became an unexpected symbol of resilience and dignity. Her calm demeanor in the face of Mr. Henderson's blatant racism, her unwavering insistence on her rights, and her refusal to be intimidated had resonated deeply with people across the country. She had become a powerful example of how to confront prejudice and injustice, a testament to the strength and courage of ordinary people. News outlets and social media platforms celebrated her composure and her steadfastness. She was interviewed on television and radio, sharing her story and inspiring others to speak out against racism. She became a voice for the voiceless, a symbol of hope for those who had experienced similar acts of discrimination. Her story was a reminder that even in the face of overwhelming adversity, it is possible to stand up for what is right, to fight for justice, and to emerge victorious. Aisha's experience sparked a broader conversation about systemic racism and the importance of bystander intervention. Experts and activists weighed in on the issue, highlighting the insidious ways in which prejudice can manifest itself in everyday life and the need for greater awareness and accountability. The incident served as a stark reminder that racism is not just a problem of individual prejudice. It is a systemic issue that requires a multifaceted approach to address. David, the young man who had recorded the video, also became a symbol of courage and civic responsibility. He was praised for his quick thinking, his willingness to document the incident, and his decision to share the video online. He had used his phone, a tool that is often associated with superficiality and distraction, to expose injustice and bring about positive change. His actions served as a powerful example of how ordinary people can use technology to fight for justice and make a difference in the world. The incident prompted a renewed focus on the importance of bystander intervention. Experts and activists emphasized the need for people to speak up when they witness acts of racism and discrimination. They highlighted the power of collective action, the importance of challenging prejudice, and the need to create a culture of accountability. David's actions became a powerful example of how a single individual can make a difference, how a simple act of courage can have far-reaching consequences. The incident also sparked conversations about the role of technology in exposing injustice. The video, shared widely across social media platforms, had served as a powerful tool for accountability, bringing Mr. Henderson's actions to light and forcing the train company to address the issue of racism. The incident demonstrated the power of technology to amplify marginalized voices, to expose wrongdoing, and to mobilize public opinion. Aisha and David's experience became a powerful case study in the fight against racism, highlighting the importance of individual courage, collective action, and the use of technology to expose injustice. Their stories served as a reminder that even in the face of overwhelming adversity, it is possible to make a difference, to fight for justice, and to inspire others to do the same. The incident, though deeply painful, had ultimately sparked a much-needed conversation about racism and the importance of confronting it head-on. The world was watching, and the fight for equality had taken a significant step forward.